Okay. Yesterday, we went through the Yesod Shishi, the sixth principle, which is prophecy. That the intellectual capacity of a human being can be attached to what's called the Seichel HaPoel, which is the always fully realized intellect, which the Kadosh Baruch Hu provides for the world, which enables us to learn things, it enables us to pass from potentiality to actuality, but it is always totally actualized. And that delivers understanding to Nevi'im in very great measure. And that is the description of all prophets except one. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is excluded. He's on a different level altogether. And that is the seventh principle. I'll read you through the seventh principle here, and then I'll supplement it with things from the Mishnah Torah. He starts off by saying that we believe that Moshe Rabbeinu is Avihen Shel Nevi'im. Literally, it means the father of Nevi'im, but it connotes being the most superior of all the prophets. Shekadmu lefonav ve'ela shachrav. That includes both those who precede him and those who follow him. There are quarters in which some people think and speak about the Mashiach being a greater prophet than Moses, not for the Rambam. Wherever they're coming from, it's definitely not the Rambam. He says this explicitly over and over again. Moshe Rabbeinu's position as the greatest of the prophets includes everybody else before and after. They are all below him in level. And he is the one who's chosen to us by Hashem from the whole of the human species. That he, Moses, achieved understanding from HaKadosh Baruch Hu more than anything that has been achieved and that will be achieved by all people that did exist and will exist. So he said it 3 times, including past and future. Hard to make a mistake out of that. And that he goes on to say more than that now, and that he rose to the extreme end of the human species to the point where he achieved the level of a malach, of an angel. I must tell you, I've taught this many times as being in the Mishnah Torah, and because of what the Meshech Chochmah says in his introduction to Sefer Shmos, I have forgotten that the Rambam writes about it here. And it's even clearer here than it is there. He says he has the level of an angel. He became on the level of the Malachim. What he's adding here before what he said before, he said it twice already. Now he says, one second. There was not left over any barrier, veil, seal in front of him that he didn't tear in pieces. Sometimes you hear about having torn all the veils except one. Rambam doesn't say that. He says they're all gone. There's no veil between them at all. There's no physical preventative from him to attach himself to above and to see and to understand. There was nothing in him of lack. Nothing lacking in him. Not a lot, nor a lot, not a little or a lot. And the capacities that we know associated with normal human living, which would have been barriers, were completely missing from him. Now he speaks about the dimyon and the chushim. The chushim are senses, and when you are experiencing the world and trying to make sense out of the world, your senses provide you a lot of information. But, and in certain cases of what the senses provide you with is necessary. Nobody's saying that you should pretend that you don't have senses or close your eyes and ears. But you can't compare what the senses give you with what your mind gives you. And one way to see that, I'm doing a little philosophy now, is to compare what you learn through experience, and which is there's no example, there's no counterexamples, and it's around you all the time, and it's something which you take for granted, and you would be very surprised, and you would be very reluctant to accept there was an exception, like, for example, an unsupported object which is heavier than air falls. Unless there's motion of air that holds it up, something holding it up. But if it's unsupported, it falls. A heavier than air object falls. Somebody tells you, but not in my backyard. In my backyard, they go up. You'd be very reluctant to accept that. How about 2 plus 2 is 4? I think somebody said in my backyard 2 plus 2 is 3, or 2 plus 2 is 5. You'd be very reluctant to accept that. There were philosophers, John Stuart Mill among them, who was a great philosopher, who said they're basically the same. You just live life and you look at what's happening in the world and you see unsupported things fall, and whenever you have 2 and 2, you have 4. The world of philosophy has rejected John Stuart Mill, I would say almost unanimously. There's a big difference between gravity on the one hand and 2 plus 2 is 4. Let's suppose the guy says, in my backyard, stones don't fall. They float. That's just what it is. Come on. You must be kidding me. What are you drinking? What are you sniffing? What are you injecting? You can't take that seriously. You haven't been in my backyard. Come, I'll show you. Go to his backyard, pick up a stone, you let go, and it sits there. You got it tied up with an invisible string, that I can't see. Oh, it's really a magnet. It's a magnet holding it up. Don't give me this stuff. I know that things fall. Really? Test it. Test it. I'll bring in the Stanford physics department, and they test it. Sorry, it just doesn't fall. It doesn't. Is there any point at which you begin to get queasy? Maybe gravity has exceptions. Maybe. I mean, after all, we're trying it every which way. Since you did learn gravity from experience, it's conceivable that with enough pressure, with enough contrary experience, you'll change your mind, because it's experience against experience. Indeed, in physics at one point, they wanted to say that at a certain point, gravity becomes repulsive. Instead of attracting, it repels. Gravity! Hello! That's what makes things fall. Not always. Not always. Not always. Sometimes it makes things fly away. Gravity? Yeah, because, we have these observations, and we have these calculations, and over there it will be different. That's because we learn from experience. Compare that with 2 plus 2 is 4. I want to tell you a secret. You think 2 plus 2 is 4. Usually it is, but not in my bag. In my bag, 2 plus 2 is 3. When you put 2 apples and 2 apples in my bag, you get back all your apples. And when you count them, it's 3. Watch, I'll show you. Give me your apples. Give me your apples. Don't ask me to do it on mine. Give me your apples. So, okay, fine. Put in 2 apples, shake up the bag, and roll it out, and say, see, 3 apples. There's all your apples. They're all there on the table. all three of them, because in my bag, 2 plus 2 is 3. Are you going to buy that? Suppose he does it 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Are you going to buy that? What you're going to say is, you owe me 10,000 apples! You stole an apple each time. 2 plus 2 is not 3. 2 plus 2 is 4. You put 2 in and 2 in and only 3 come out, you took one of my apples. No matter how many times it happens. If it happens on Mars, if it happens in the standard of weights and measures in Washington, you're not going to buy it. 2 plus 2 is 4 and it's not 3. That shows you that 2 plus 2 is 4 is not learned from experience. It's a principle you understand with your mind and you apply it to the world. You don't learn it from the world. You learn what numbers are. You learn to count when you're 3 years old. But the principle isn't based on what you learned when you were 3. The principle is based on your mature understanding that 2 plus 2 is 4. So, the Rambam says here, when you are learning something from your senses, it doesn't have the certainty that even mathematics has. What the Navi gets, what Moshe Rabbeinu got, was greater than that. It's greater than even 2 plus 2 is 4. It had a certainty that transcends anything that the senses get in the way of that. And therefore he says, when Moshe Rabbeinu had prophecy, his senses weren't working. And then he says the dimyon isn't working. Now, we have to be, I'll tell you what I learned from Rabbi Meiselman, and to me, it's a little bit of an unfinished subject, but it's a very important thing to think about. Dimyon is often translated into English as imagination. What is the imagination? Well, it's the image machine. It makes images. And sometimes the imagination stores images that you perceived in memory. And sometimes you make new images. You can combine pieces of old images. You can think of a cow with wings, take the cow and take the wings from the eagle, paste one on the other. And then in your mind, you have an image of a cow with an eagle. And since you can make images in your mind that don't correspond to reality, so then imagination has come to have a connotation of thinking about things that aren't real or aren't known to be real. We talk about people who invent things as people who go ahead imagination. Gee, I wonder what would happen if you put this and this together, which has never been done. So when he makes the image in his mind, not something that he saw someplace or read or heard someplace, he's making a new image. And maybe it could be made real, even though it hasn't been real up until now. And then when people talk about don't get lost in your imagination, because you're lost in a world that isn't, at least certainly isn't recognized now, and isn't tied to the world that we know, so that could be a dangerous thing. That's the way the word is understood when you translate it imagination. But the word dimyon in Hebrew has nothing to do with images at all. Semantically, not connected to images at all. Dimyon comes with omer, which means similarity. And similarity is the raw material out of which you make categories. Categories are groups of things which are similar in some important way. This doesn't have a natural connection to things that aren't real. And if you're going to use words and concepts, what stands behind words and concepts are categories. The difference between dog, the word dog, and the word pencil is the kind of thing to which they apply. And the kind of thing to which they apply is as a group of things that are similar in some respect. So similarity is the basis of your whole conceptual scheme. So it's not obvious that dimyon should be translated as imagination, and it's not obvious that dimyon should carry the connotation of dealing with things that aren't real. Hopefully, all the similarities that you recognize are real similarities. And hopefully you recognize the difference in character between different types of similarities. For example, you could talk about all $10 bills or all the money in George's pocket. All $10 bills are going to have the same value and the same shape and the same size and the same pictures on them. And all the money in his pocket might include $100 bills and half-dollar coins. So, but one has similarity of shape and value and picture, and the other has similarity of ownership. And they're both important similarities. They both have important consequences. So Dimyon, but the bottom line is that Dimyon is the human conceptual scheme. Now, that human conceptual scheme that you use is the eyeglasses that you use to look at the world. It's the category used to interpret information. Of course, it's not fixed. It develops and changes all the time, especially when you grow up. They change all, and you add new categories. You revise old categories. Sometimes you delete categories, and the importance of the categories changes vastly as you go through life. So it's not fixed, but at any one moment in time, that's what you use to interpret the world. Rambam says and therefore it sets a barrier, because the categories through which you interpret the world prevent you from seeing some things in the world. That's why categories change. They change because you have these categories and you use it to interpret something and it doesn't work. For example, you use it to interpret something and you make plans. You expect certain things to happen because of the way you interpret it, and they don't happen that way. And then you say, well, I'm not getting it. I'm not getting it. Something is missing here. You may have heard of conservation laws, not the humpbacked whale, but in physics, once upon a time, they thought mass was conserved. Whenever you have an interaction, you have the same amount of mass you started with. And energy was conserved. When you had a certain amount of energy in the system, whatever you did with it, you had the same amount of energy when you came out at the end. It didn't work. Turns out that conservation is conservation of mass energy, because Einstein taught us mass can be converted into energy, and energy can be converted into mass, so you can't separate them. So if you want to talk about the sum total of a system, you've got to talk about the sum total of mass plus energy, or mass energy. That stays constant. So mass alone and energy alone are wrong concepts. They don't create the similarities that you want for conservation. It's only mass energy that does that. So the categories change. Rambam says that wasn't functioning. Because Baruch Hu projected this kind of information into Moshe Meir's mind that wasn't limited by the human categories that we use to sift through the things that happen. Now, whether that means that with the information came new categories so we could understand it, or whether we're talking about some understanding that goes beyond categories, which I have no picture of what that is, but he says explicitly that the dimyon, the koach dimyon, was not functioning. So that the dimyon and the senses both can be human characteristics which function as a barrier to prophecy, a permeable barrier. Some prophecy can get through, but when you are like Moses, where they're not functioning, that lets the prophecy through pure, without any dilution. And his whole active capacity, will, decision, and I think it includes motivation, that he's an agent doing things, is on hold. V'nishar sechel avad, and he remains just intellect. Nothing else human about him is functional, only the intellect. And this is what it meant when the verses say that he spoke to Hashem, and it means without the intermediary of angels. I told you, says the Rambam in the sixth principle, that prophecy is mediated by angels. And Gottleib told you that, he says in the Torah, that's why there were angels on top of the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, to teach you that connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu comes through angels, right? Not from Moses. Moses is exempt from that. Okay, I'll do that. And now he says, I would explain to you this phenomenal idea, and I would unravel all that's hidden in it, and all that's hidden in the verses of the Torah, and I would explain what Peh Peh means, mouth to mouth, and the whole pasuk that's speaking over there, how Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy was different from all other prophets, different from Aaron and Miriam, when they were complaining about it. I would do that if it weren't for the fact that I see that these things are very subtle and they need great length and many introductory ideas and parables to get them across. And we'd have to explain first what angels are and the difference between their various levels and them and the Creator. And then we'd have to explain the human soul and all of its capabilities and the length of explanation and words, and we have to explain the abstract tsuros, qualities that the prophets and the pictures that the prophets used to describe the Creator and the angels. And if this wouldn't be enough by itself, even if I were to be very brief in the maximum briefness possible, it would require at least 100 pages. And therefore, I'm leaving it for its place. Whether it'll be in the Sefer, the work that I'm going to compose, analyzing the drushos, the ways, places in Chazal, where they speak in ways that are parables or symbolic, and so forth and so on, that I promised you, he writes, but he never got to do it. He never did it. Or there's a book on prophecy altogether that I'm working on, which we don't have. Or in some other sefer, when the time will come and I'll be able to explain these principles to you, I'm not doing it here. It means that prophecy is how shall I say, there are certain subjects which form, like it spokes on, you have the spokes on a wheel, so you have the center thing which holds the spokes that go out. I don't know what you call that center thing in a wheel. Hub? Oh. So some ideas are like a hub of a wheel of ideas. And when I speak to you about free will, I always say that. Free will is connected to a bunch of other things, and that's what makes it so hard. Because any move you make in free will, calculate the consequences. So what's going to happen with philosophy of language? What's going to happen with mentality? What's going to happen with metaphysics? They're all connected. Here he's saying that prophecy is like that. And to do a full job on it, you'd have to explain all the spokes in order to understand the hub. And he hasn't got this space to do it. But this idea that Moses functions like an angel is here word for word, even more word for word than it is in the Mishnah Torah. There's an implication. He says that Moses was like angels twice in the 7th chapter, in the same, I think in the 2nd halacha. He says it in detail, but some of you have to work out on your own. Here he says it with absolute precision and clarity. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask, from the deeds or the decisions that Moshe Rabbeinu did through his life, which brought him to such a level, like what's the level of Behira together with the potential that the...
Okay, so the Meshech Chochmah, which I strongly recommend to all of you, is the introduction to Sefer Shmos, the book of Exodus, where he talks about this in detail. He says that when he got to this level that we've been describing now, he did not have Behira. He did not have free will. Now, he asks, well, isn't free will the point of our existence? Isn't the whole point of our existence to exercise free will? Isn't that what makes us different, not only from the squirrels, but also from the malachim, and superior to them, that we have free will? And his answer is that if you use your free will to eliminate your free will, then you have satisfied the purpose of free will. The purpose of free will is not to keep using it all the time. It's not as if you get to the point where you don't use free will anymore, then you're less. Reflect, something now I've told you a few times, reflect, in the world to come, there's no free will, right? Do you become less? Subhuman? Somehow fractured? Injured? Because you don't have free will? Adarabah. The whole point of exercising free will in this world is to get to the next world where there is no free will. So losing free will itself can't be a diminution of the human being. So if you want, you can think that what Moshe Rabbeinu accomplished was to achieve something like his position in the world to come here. That's not a loss. He didn't lose anything thereby. The contrary, Meshach says, that's the highest level that you can expect for a person. And as I sometimes point out, so as to try to overcome some prejudices, this may be a vain hope of mine, Sefer HaTanya says the same thing, which is written before the Meshech Chochmah, that there are three levels of human beings, Tzaddik, Benoni, and Rasha. And Tzaddik is a person who has no battle with the Yetzer Hara, because he has no Yetzer Hara and he has no free will. And therefore he does everything right. And Benoni does everything right also. But there's a big difference. The Benoni has to struggle. He has to struggle to do everything right. And the Tzaddik has gotten to the point where he's beyond struggle. And as my Rebbetzin pointed out to me this afternoon, what the Tanya is telling you is the struggle of the Benoni is to become a tzaddik. That's what he's working on. He's doing everything right in the struggle to overcome, in the Tanya's words, lafoch, to remake himself into a tzaddik where there's no free will. And that's his greatest conquest of evil, because the Benoni has in him something that motivates him to do the wrong thing. So there's something of evil in him. The goal here is to be hofech hara latov, to overturn the character of Ra, of evil, into good. And when you do that, if you're all good, then there's no challenge, there's no temptation to do anything else. As I have told you in other contexts, free will requires that there be conflict in your motivation. You only make a free will decision when part of you wants A and part of you wants B, and there's a difference in the value of A and B, the real value, and then you can freely choose to allow the motivation for A to operate, or to allow the motivation for B to operate. But there's no conflict, there's no free will. And that's what the Benoni does. That's the last step. When the Benoni becomes a tzaddik, is when the Benoni succeeds in revolutionizing, maybe that's the best way to translate lafoch, revolutionizing the evil in him and making it good, and from then on there's no free will. So that's what the Rambam, that's what the Meshech Chochmah says there about the Rambam in the Shaktam and Shefer Shmos. And for those who are inclined to be prejudiced against the Baal HaTanya, first of all, get rid of the prejudice. And second of all, here's at least where something which the Baal HaTanya said, and which many people are put off by when they first see it in the Tanya or hear it. If the Meshech Chochmah said it, then it's probably okay, right? The Meshech Chochmah can testify for the Baal HaTanya. Yeah, I mean it as a joke, right? Yeah.
What is a Russia then?
Russia sometimes does things that are bad. Sometimes.
What's a person that's only bad?
Sorry?
What's a person that's only bad?
A very big Russia. Not everybody agrees in that way of defining these terms. And I would say more than that. These terms have many different editions in many different places. And everybody agrees to that. So the Baal HaTanya is talking there about a certain subject, and that's the definition he uses there. But that it should be so at all possible, that's what turns is surprising to some people. And now you see that what the source is for it. The Rambam here in the Parish of Mishnayos does not speak about free will, nor does he in the Mishnah Torah when he talks about the Rambam and being like a malach. But as far as I know, in all of the writings of the Rambam that I have seen, never does he associate free will with a malach, with an angel, never. So if you would ask the Rambam, well, did Moshe Rabbeinu have free will? I think it's quite clear that he would say, yeah, he did not, because if he really became like a malach, then free will is not shaykh, not possible. Okay. Now the Rambam says, let's get back to work. I'm sorry, too many pages here. And I will return to the concept of the seventh principle that I was working with. And I shall say, the weakness of Moshe, the prophecy of Moshe is distinguished from all the other prophets in arba things, four items, four dimensions. First of all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to all the other prophets through an intermediary, and Moshe without an intermediary. That's one of the many things that is meant by the verse Pe'el Pe'adaberbo. I'll speak to him mouth to mouth. Even without understanding the depth of that verse, it says there's no intermediary. I speak to him mouth to mouth. What ought to bother you here is, don't you speak mouth to ear? What does it mean he speaks mouth to mouth? That's a good question. But the Rambam doesn't deal with it. But I'll tell you off the cuff one thing that it means. We have a statement in Chazal about Moshe Rabbeinu that Shechina medaberes mitoch grono. The Shechina speaks from Moses' throat. That's very good for Pe'el Peh, isn't it? Kodesh Baruch Hu's mouth speaks through Moses' mouth. That's Pe'el Peh. It's not describing what we call in Hebrew a meeting b'arba einayim. It's not a face-to-face meeting. Face-to-face wouldn't give you mouth-to-mouth. But because Baruch Hu Kiviyachol is occupying Moses' throat and speaking out, the words come out of Moses' mouth from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not from Moses. So it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mouth speaking through Moses' mouth. That's not bad in the pasuk, right? That's pretty direct. But all the Rambam wants from it here is that there's no intermediary. And the second distinction is that the normal prophet only gets the revelation. Now he speaks here of a mara, of a vision, when he's in a condition of unconsciousness or semi-consciousness, not fully alert. For example, b'chalom halayla. It says in several places the prophet got it in a dream at night. Vayachlom, b'chalom, b'chazyon, layla. And there are many verses that speak about that. Or it might be daytime, the sun might be shining, but a trance falls upon him, on the Navi. And one of the things that happens when he's asleep at night or he's in the trance, all of his senses stop functioning, which I told you before. And his thought is free when he's sleeping. Typically, when you're dreaming, you don't think things through. You don't analyze problems and do mathematical proofs. When you're aware, when you're dreaming, you're just aware of things happening to you. And this is called machzeh umara. Umara, I think, if I understand the psukim correctly. Machzeh means a vision, and mar'ah, in the same verse over there in Baaloscha, where he's describing the difference between Moshe and other prophets, the word is spelled mem resh aleph hey, and it appears there twice. Once pronounced mar'ah, and once pronounced mar'eh. And the verse says other prophets have mar'ah, and Moshe has mar'eh. So understand, there's a big difference there. If the Kodesh Baruch Hu is describing what's unique about Moses and not found in other prophets, then the change from a segol to a kamatz is very important. And it's a change between masculine and feminine. And the implication is that the feminine form has distortions in it, and the masculine form does not. And of the various other prophets, it's supposed Mar'os Elokim, Mar'os is feminine, plural, and that's a pasuk in Yechezkel. Moshe, the voice of the prophecy comes to him at day, and he's standing between the two angels on the cover of the Aron Kodesh. That way HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised him, I will commune with you there, and I'll speak to you there from that spot. And that he was totally awake, totally alive, totally alert. And this is the verse that I just told you about in Baloscha, where it says, if you'll have a prophet, then that Hashem appears to him, B'maro elav esvado, I will appear to him in a mar'ah, in a dream, I'll speak to him. My servant Moses is not like that. Now that's the second difference. The first difference was intermediary. The second difference is the quality of the prophetic experience itself. And the third difference is any normal prophet, when he has the revelation of the prophecy, even though it is with a mar'ah and via a malach, an angel standing in between, even though it's diluted, even though it's an intermediary, all of his strength will disappear and the whole structure of his body becomes undone, and he falls to the ground. He can't stand up. And he's frightened to death, and he feels like he's going to die. Like Daniel said, when Gabriel was speaking with him, he said, I had no strength left. V'hodi, my honor, my glory, it became destroyed. I had no strength left. I see near dam, I was unconscious. Apanai arza, I was flattened out on my face was on the ground. And it says over there, all my strength disappeared from me. Moshe was not like that. The words of the prophecy, and it didn't injure him at all. And this it says, Moshe panim apanim kasher daber ish re'ehu. These absolutely unbelievable words. Kadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moses face to face. Here it says face to face. That's not the same as mouth to mouth, as I told you before. Just like a person speaks to his friend. Just like a person speaks to his friend. Nothing like that happened to any other prophet. All of the prophets were completely overwhelmed by the experience. Kolomar, that is to say, just like when one person speaks to another person, he doesn't become deathly afraid because of the other person's speech. So too, when Kosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, he wasn't in fear and trembling and the rest, even though it was face to face. And this is because of the great attachment of the Kodesh Baruch of Moshe Rabbeinu's mind, his seichel that we said, because he's attached. The seichel Paul, the fully functional intellect, is something. What its relationship is to Kodesh Baruch Hu himself is not easy to understand, but that thing sort of represents the Kodesh Baruch Hu in the world, and Moshe Rabbeinu is attached to that. He's attached to that absolutely, wholly, without any barrier, and that gives him the strength to be able to withstand an interaction with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. I'm just thinking now, this is very similar, seems to be similar at the moment, to when Moshe Rabbeinu went to get the Torah to heaven, so to speak, and he was arguing with the angels. The angels gave various arguments against giving the Torah to people, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu said, answer them. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, they'll burn me up with their fiery breath. And Kodesh Baruch Hu said, take hold of my throne and answer them. That means taking hold of Kodesh Baruch Hu's throne makes you invulnerable to that kind of attack or that kind of danger. So I'm wondering now whether the Rambam wouldn't see that reference to the throne as a reference to the Seichel HaPoel. And he's explaining now that because he's attached to Seichel HaPoel, the direct interaction with the Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't undo him, doesn't frighten him, doesn't doesn't scare him because it's attached to that aspect that the Kodesh Baruch Hu makes available of himself, then he can withstand the other interaction with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. The challenges aren't exactly the same. There it's Malachim, and here it's the face-to-face interaction with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. But still, they're very similar because you're attached to this. You're not afraid of that. So my guess is there is a connection there. You have a question?
How does it work that Moshe Rabbeinu has a conversation with Hashem? It's not as if Hashem doesn't know anything that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to say.
Okay, this is a good question. This is a standard question. What does it mean that Kodesh Baruch Hu has a conversation with Moshe Rabbeinu? Now, you're referring to specific ones. For example, when the Kodesh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu after the Egel, golden calf, that's the end of it. I'm going to destroy the people and make a new people out of you. And then Moshe Rabbeinu gives 3 arguments where he says, okay, I won't destroy them. Now you're asking, what's the point of the conversation if the Kodesh Baruch Hu knew beforehand what Moshe Rabbeinu was going to say? And the answer to that is, Kodesh Baruch Hu knew what Moshe would say, but we don't know. That passage teaches us these are the things that could prevent destruction. These are the things that Kodesh Baruch Hu cares about. That's what we learn from the interaction. It's not that Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't know. Rambam says this explicitly by the Akedah, where the Kodesh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to sacrifice Isaac. And he says, not because the Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't know what Avram would do, but none of us would know what he would do. So when he gives him the order and he carries it out, we learn from that what a human being can accomplish, which we wouldn't otherwise know. So when that kind of interaction takes place, and that's very common. Kodesh Baruch Hu says to Avram Avinu, I'm going to destroy stone. And Avram Avinu says, if there are 50 there, will you spare the place? Kodesh Baruch Hu says, okay, I will. Which before he didn't say. So, but he knew he was going to say, but we wouldn't know that the presence of Tzaddikim there would help. And we wouldn't know that 10 is the limit. If he hadn't gone down to 10 and stopped. So it's all for the sake of teaching us what we need to know.
That wasn't really my question. My question was if Moshe Rabbeinu is attaching himself to Hashem in this sense, how is there a conversation to be had? Isn't there no words to be discussed? It's like it's above language. It's above any sort of.
Oh, I don't think so. That's a very deep philosophical question. There's no question that I will share on this. There's no question that there are understandings that aren't put into words. But there are also understandings that are put into words. And it isn't as if you have all the understandings that aren't put into words that you don't need words anymore. Words are a kli, they're an instrument whereby you can formulate things which sometimes without words you wouldn't be able to formulate. I had a teacher in graduate school, Nelson Goodman, who said we're fond of saying a word is worth 1,000, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And really what we mean to say is that even 1,000 words wouldn't do justice to a picture. That's correct. But there are also words that are worth 1,000 pictures, and pictures can't do it in the end at all. For example, the current temperature is 20 degrees centigrade. Communicate that or express that without using words. Just use pictures, but no symbols. Not going to work. So, words are a way of portraying the world. Symbols are a way of portraying the world, and neither one makes the other useless or superfluous. Suppose you live in a neighborhood, and you know the streets, and you know how to get from one place to another. And someone asks you, I have exactly 2 gallons of gasoline, and I have to make a maximum number of stops possible. What route should I use? I think you would find a map very useful for that. Because if you had a map, you'd be able to see where you can make turns, and you'd be able to see how long each one was, which ways the streets are one-way streets, and you'd be able to figure it out from the map in a way which your knowing intuitively how to get there might not give you. The map gives you information about the neighborhood that your personal experience doesn't give, and vice versa. They're both necessary. And I think this is the explanation of the famous Chazal, which says that at the splitting of the sea, the handmaid saw what Ezekiel, the prophet, didn't see. And that's, of course, 100% true. But what people don't realize, some commentators explain, it's also true that Ezekiel saw things that she didn't see. The first statement doesn't say that she saw everything Ezekiel saw and more. It doesn't say that. It says, what she saw at the sea, Ezekiel didn't see. But it's also true that he saw things that she didn't see. Now, what's the difference? So I believe that the difference is this. You take out the first several chapters of Ezekiel, and it's all symbols. There are different types of angels, and they go this way, they go that way, and they have so many faces, and the faces look like this, they're pointing in different directions. Like, so what? I mean, what? Is this just a kind of, catalog of the things above? Obviously, great fundamental ideas are being portrayed here in symbolic form. To understand that, you have to have a certain amount of sophistication, or a great amount of sophistication. Not everybody can appreciate what's written in Yechezkel. The whole of the Kabbalah, in a certain way, traces it back to Yechezkel. That's the first place you find it in any great detail in prophetic sources. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu knew it and transmitted it, but in the prophetic sources that we have, what was experienced at the sea is formulated in the verse Zekeli V'Avehu. This is my God, and I will glorify Him. And Chazal say Ayumarim Be'etzba. The word Zeh is a demonstrative. You say this for something that's present and open and visible. How can you say Zekeli? This is my God. And the explanation that's given, there are many explanations, of course, but one explanation that's given is that everything that exists its existence is due to a spark of kedusha, of holiness that it possesses, which gives it its existence. The trouble is, the situation is that the spark is encased in a shell, and the shell is opaque, so you don't see it. And for some short period of time, while they were crossing the sea, all the shells went transparent. So you could see the sparks of holiness, which visualize God's will, keeping everything in existence. In the stones, in the water, in the wind, you see the sparks of holiness everywhere. And they can point to that and say, Zekeli. That Ezekiel didn't see. So each one saw something the other one didn't see, which means that total understanding would require both visions. One's in words, because those are the words in the book of Ezekiel, and the other wasn't in words. The other was an experience. So the fact that there is knowledge in above words doesn't mean that words don't contain important information that isn't yet retrievable from that knowledge. That in Kabbalistic sources is Chachma Bina. Chachma has many meanings, has many different sources and places, but one explanation of Chachma is that it grasps that's above words, and Bina puts the grasp of Chachma into words. When you put it into words, for one thing, you can communicate it to somebody else that doesn't have it, and the putting it into words, as some sources say, gives you a measure of understanding of it that you didn't have beforehand. So the fact that you communicate sometimes without words doesn't mean that you don't use words. And indeed, in the ordinary prophets, they often see pictures. Rambam says that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't see any pictures. But the ordinary prophets saw pictures and got words, both of them. And indeed, in some cases, the prophet sees a picture, and the Malach says to him, do you understand the picture? And the prophet says, no, I don't. One case he says, you don't? You mean I have to explain it to you? Yeah, you have to explain it because I don't understand. And then the Malach communicates to him the meaning of the picture, which means you could have the picture and not have the meaning of the picture. What has to be communicated to us is both the picture and the meaning. That's why the book of the prophet records, I saw an overflowing pot, cooking pot, or I saw a menorah, and the angel said to me, this is what it means. So it's just not true that if you have above words, that you don't need words. Again, I have a whole shir on this subject, and I talk about the interaction between them. Okay.